You ever got a renovation loan that is, say, over $35,000 or structural, or maybe you got kind of a conventional renovation loan where sometimes a HUD consultant is required by that particular lender, or you do an FHA loan that is structural over $35,000, an FHA 203K, and requires a HUD consultant. Well, what is a HUD consultant? Hey, welcome to the Renovation Nation. I'm Howard, your renovation guru. HUD consultants, what are they? What do they do? What purpose do they have? Are they working for you, against you? Are they working for the lender? Are they looking for their general contractor? What do they do? Well, I sat down and talked with a HUD consultant, a guy named Dan Rowland. Okay, he's been doing this for a number of years. And we had a good conversation on what his role is, some of the things that he's seen, and really just kind of get into the mind of a HUD consultant. So listen into this conversation. Hey, this is Howard Nordberg on the scene here for the Renovation Nation. I just happen to be sitting out in a lovely park, and I have in front of me a good friend of mine who's also a HUD consultant, and that's what this topic is all about. What is the role of a HUD consultant? You might have heard about it. What role do they play in like a renovation loan and that sort of thing? The person sitting right across from me is Dan Rowland, who's a HUD consultant. We're going to talk about a little things about, what does a HUD consultant do? Some of the misunderstandings and the roles and all that other kind of stuff. So I'd like to introduce you, Dan Rowland.
Howdy, how are you?
So Dan, I just wanted to start off really quick. How long have you been a HUD consultant?
Since 2006, about 16 years.
About 16 years. So, and what would qualify a person to do a HUD consultant?
Well, there's a process that you have to go through with HUD and FHA to get certified. And part of that documentation is proving your skill set.
Right.
And your longevity within the field of construction and real estate. I actually, the first time I filled out the paperwork was rejected primarily because I did not provide them with the software that I was going to use to apply all the forms and stuff that are involved. The nature of this of being a consultant is that this program has been around since the 1970s.
Right.
And it was very little utilized right at first because it was so difficult to generate all the paperwork that was required.
Right.
Especially for a novice.
Right.
And so they instituted the role of a consultant, and the program then began to blossom and has extended all throughout the United States and it become fairly prominent for renovation.
And my understanding is a lot of HUD consultants, they still may be active in some sort of construction part of the business. And my understanding is some of the areas that they look for experience would be maybe a general contractor or a home inspector. I don't know if an appraiser would fit into that or not, but various backgrounds having to deal with construction and what the codes are and all that other kind of stuff. So
that's true. I came into this business from owning a home inspection company.
Okay.
And I ran that for about 2 or 3 years and found out about this program, which offered much more flexibility in what I could do with both companies.
Right.
And so I stayed with the home inspection company a while doing this, and then I found that dedicating myself to the consultant role offered my customers a much better situation in dealing with, what we were presented with.
Right. And, one of the misunderstandings a lot of people may have is, who do you work for? I mean, are you like a government employee that works for HUD or FHA or something?
Actually, we are selected by the bank The lending institution has a responsibility of picking the consultant. The homeowner has a responsibility of selecting the contractor.
Right.
We kind of develop a fiduciary relationship with the homeowner, in that I contract with them to fill out all the paperwork for the bank to create their loan and install the escrow in place so we can pay their selected contractor for the work as it's completed.
Right, but you're not like a government employee. You're not paid by
No,
FHA or anything like that. You're basically, for all intents and purposes, authorized by FHA to do what you do.
correct.
Okay, and you have to make sure that you have an understanding what the FHA guidelines are, and things like that. How does one determine the cost of what a HUD consultant does?
Well, it's it's unique. Some of the fees that consultants get are in place since 1976 and haven't changed. So,
And those are spelled out in FHA guidelines?
right, it's a FHA guidelines 4000.1, and there's a specific in the area. It talks about appraisers, it talks about consultants. It lists all the fees, breaking out from 1 to 4 units, whether you're dealing with a duplex or a 4-unit or whatever, and then it details all the fees for the work part that I do and for my draws.
And that hasn't changed since 1970?
1976, the base fee for doing the documentation has not changed.
So you can imagine, even working in your own job, that you haven't got a raise or whatever since 1976 or so.
Other than for draws. They did a few years ago increase the amount. We used to just get $100 to do a draw. Didn't
Right.
matter whether it was San Francisco or Lake Tahoe.
Right.
And they've since made an allowance and increased the amount for the draws. And it's become kind of a universal fee also, but that's also posted
Spelled out,
in
yeah.
the guidelines.
And then they spell out, mileage on there, but that's going to be based on what the IRS
Correct.
allowable mileage you can charge on there. So that's the only thing on there that may change year after year.
Right.
Sometimes can go down.
Yeah, that's exactly true, and it has before. The thing of it is also, but they have a maximum mileage that they allow of $100. That's the most you can charge for mileage, and that would be like going to San Francisco and back from here in Sacramento, going across the bridges. All that's included.
Right.
Also, you get the first 30 miles free from the round trip. So if it's close, and for me, then there is no mileage.
I mean, considering the cost of gas,
Right.
that's really kind of bit into the expense. And I know a lot of people are talking about, the rise in interest rates and things like that. Well, you can imagine how that's kind of impacted even a lot of the business surrounding what makes a home loan or home renovation loan happen, including the lives of, the appraiser and the HUD consultants and things like that. So some of the misunderstandings might be that they view you as a person that would be like an inspector, like would be from the county inspecting the job. But I kind of see you more, and correct me if I'm wrong, more of kind of an advocate.
That's correct. Well, we do know the codes. We can't authorize or clear any portion of that. It has to be done by a certified county or city employee that's responsible for those inspections and signing off. I do have to have his signed off authority at the end of the project and a certificate of occupancy for most of the situations, all done by the county or the city.
So let's just back up just a little bit. Normally what happens in any situation, whether it's going to, if it's going to be an FHA loan, there's the FHA limited, used to be known as a streamline, and then there's the full, which typically the differentiation between the two is if the work, the total amount of renovation work, including the renovation fee, is equal to or less than $35,000. Anything over that becomes a full FHA 203K, or if any of the work is considered to be structural. In those cases, FHA looks at it as being mandatory to have a HUD consultant.
That's correct.
All right, so talk about the process, the initial process all the way through the end of what you would do from the first time that you meet the homeowner or the contractor and go out to the property, and then what do you provide? In other words, what do people get for their money?
Well, that kind of varies based on where in the process I meet the homeowner.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm meeting the homeowner the same day they apply for the loan, my activities with that homeowner are quite different than if I meet him somewhere down the way in the process where they've already acquired a contractor, have bids, and are into that. It runs about 50-50 on whether a customer is enlightened a little bit about the program or not at all.
Right.
But my job is to help them understand what is going to be expected of them and what's going to be expected of me, and define that indeed the project is theirs and the responsibility for its completion is theirs,
Mm-hmm.
but I will help them through that process. There's a contractor agreement that is initiated which pretty much defines the two stages of my job.
Right.
The first part is to help create all the documentation to get the loan, everything that the bank and underwriters need to process all the paperwork to make sure that the loan can close.
Mm-hmm.
The second part of my job is once the money is in escrow, they've engaged a contractor and the contractor goes to the work. They're allowed up to 5 draws out of that escrow fund, and I work with the contractor to make sure he's completed the various stages of that process and pay them accordingly out of that escrow.
So you're called out each time there's a draw request at that point.
Correct.
So a little bit more detail into the beginning stages of it. When you initially consult with the homeowner and then the general contractor, you're going to be going over, first off, you're going to look at the home, whether it's refinance or purchase, and you're going to identify some items that may be health and safety issues.
Right.
Right? Sometimes you'll have homeowners say, don't worry about it, I'll take care of that myself, that kind of stuff. But what ends up happening is if it's not addressed and the appraiser points it out, you lose steps in the process.
Right.
Right? We shouldn't depend upon the appraiser to find these things.
Correct. I make a point of explaining to them, it may seem like I'm being very picky, but you have to understand that if you don't want us to have to repeat processes, then it's best if we list everything. When the appraiser comes and sees that we've done due diligence, he doesn't tear the place apart looking for things that I missed.
Right.
So, and almost everyone is okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
There are some adjustments that we can make within the process on some of those items that an appraiser calls out. A lot of times, like on a pest report, there are items that are listed on a pest report that the contractor has already agreed to fix.
Right.
So we kind of have to mix and match, but make sure that if there was indeed a pest report required, that all those items in Section 1 and Section 2 are cleared.
Right.
And at the end of the process, there's a cleared pest report.
Right. And so you'll meet with the contractor, you'll go over some of the items, whether they're going to be fix-it items or even additions or anything like that, and kind of go over the scope of the work. You're going to make sure that, some of the work, if it involves moving walls, for example, we want to make sure that are those walls load bearing or not. If they are, then that can kind of create a little bit different look at how it's handled. Like, for example, are you going to need an engineer report, that sort of thing. Same thing with any foundation work that may be done, depending on how what it looks like. If it looks like it's shifted or cracked or missing, you may want to recommend maybe an engineer report accordingly. But you'll work with the general contractor in putting together, working with his bid, but putting it in a format that is recognizable by FHA.
Correct.
Right, let's talk about that just for a second.
Well, the FHA uses 35 standard categories of a building.
Mm-hmm.
Everything from foundation masonry through windows, doors, breakdown for appliances, any other structural
Right. Plumbing, electrical, all that kind of stuff.
And we use that standard format, and that's the document that the contractor ultimately is paid for.
Right.
We detail what he's going to do in each of those categories. I can even pay him a percentage of completion. If he's half done with the electric, I can pay him 50%.
Right.
So each one of those draws is kind of determined by the contractor, but he tells me what he thinks he needs, and I verify that that's indeed completed. Sometimes I see more stuff that he's done that he has eligible to draw from.
Right.
But I adjust that form and then make sure that he's compensated correctly, and at the same time that the work he has done is, professionally completed.
Right. Now, I know one of the big issues a lot of general contractors have is separating out on each of those line items. Say, just for example, the 35 items that are identified in the report, is breaking out labor and materials, as they want to hold a lot of that to their chest. Some contractors will build in their overhead on each material price. Other ones will have a little bit on it, but put like a 15% overall overhead on it. And a lot of them spell that out in their contract already, but they may not necessarily want to identify any additional overhead that they've done on materials and that sort of thing. But really, the work write-up kind of brings that up to light. The form that you do, that kind of puts the labor and materials, but it's not necessarily to out the general contractor, because we know that they need to make a living, right? Yeah. And whenever they need to get any parts, there's time that when they're not at the house that they actually have to go get them, order them, or have them delivered and unpacked and that kind of stuff. So we get that. But do you get much pushback on that? And then
quite often.
Yeah.
More often than not, actually, contractors don't break out their labor materials. But I have a little bit of experience here in the years, knowing what portion of their bid item is likely going to apply to flooring or to installation of sinks and faucets and things of that nature. So even if they don't, I break out based on industry standards.
Right.
I have software that's updated some weekly and some monthly with costs of construction materials by zip code.
Is this kind of the same software like insurance companies use and
very
things
much
like
so?
That? Okay.
A lot of fire damage and stuff like that. I run into that same thing. Mm-hmm. There's a little more cleanup issues and stuff in there that are included in those. So you got to kind of use your best judgment.
Right.
But I will always be able to break that out, and then before I submit any documentation, I make sure that all of our numbers match up with the contractor. I mean, if we're off 10 cents, who gets that 10 cents?
Right.
So it's kind of important to make sure our numbers match so they get paid for what they bid.
So ultimately, the contractor is going to see that, they're going to sign it and agree to it as if it is really their own contract.
Exactly.
And of course, the homeowner is going to sign that as well.
Right.
Okay. And then you review that just to kind of do a precursor review of feasibility.
Right.
Are you charging too much, not enough, that sort of thing?
Correct. I've had different contractors have different specialties. Mm-hmm. A guy who's a roofing contractor most of the time, and also a general contractor, might make a lot more money on the roofing portion, charging general product prices, and then kind of not make so much money on some of the other parts because he's using subcontractors. I've had contractors that come and try to charge $3 a square foot to paint a single-story house when the going rate might be $1.25 a square foot.
Right.
So you kind of have to watch that and talk to them about what is it that you are going to provide that's so far above and beyond what normally they would pay. And many times they can justify what their cost increase is. They're doing additional things to the house that saying paint the exterior doesn't just describe.
Well, I know there's a lot of homeowners that going through this process think that they might be able to save money by kind of acting as their own general contractor, where I'm going to get a roofer on the job, I'm going to get an electrician, and then I'm going to get a general carpenter or whatever to kind of do this work, thinking if they could parse it out, then they might be able to save money. But I think there's a lot more difficulty doing it that route for a number of reasons. One reason I know is that from a lender's perspective, anytime you have multiple contractors on a job, it creates a higher risk of when they're going to be able to complete the job, if they complete the job, what the timing is for them to get on the job, not to mention the fact that they're going to require general liability and validate each contractor. So there's a time element, even if they cooperate that. What about on the other end when you're putting together a report? Say you have 3 or maybe 4 different contractors, maybe 2 of them might be specialty and 2 maybe some other ones. How difficult is that?
Well, the only exceptions that I allow in my paperwork process for multiple contractors is where I have a known percentage of overhead and profit that a general contractor is going to charge. And there's a major item of construction that I have subcontractor costs that adding the 20% profit, having him run it through, would throw the game. I mean, it would literally cause the process to be rejected. Mm-hmm. So I will make that allowance, create the second general. Good example is swimming pools.
Yeah.
Or if the house is large and it's got a roof that's $40,000 or $50,000.
Right.
When you charge another $10,000 or $15,000 on top of what the bid cost is, just for profit and overhead, where the contractor usually is not even doing anything.
Right.
Can blow the deal, and I will make that exception and help the homeowner out.
Yeah, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of people kind of get under the misunderstanding if they act as a general contractor, they're going to save. But if you have one general contractor that's, say, going to do a $75,000 job, as opposed to 3 contractors doing $25,000 jobs, each one of those contractors are going to bump up their profit because they're not making as much overall on each job. So it's just, right? I mean,
that's true.
So to me, it's kind of like you're better paying a little bit more overhead for one general and less headache. And then
considerably less headache.
And then I can also imagine the draw portion of it, because you're given a limited number of draws.
Right.
Generally.
Right. And in addition to the draw process, the completion times for them, if they finish months apart, then the guy who finished first has to wait until the other guy finishes his project, and sometimes that can be a couple of months.
Right.
A good example is solar. I mean, a guy wants solar. Well, it's almost always going to be a subcontractor involved with that. And if we put them in as an independent, and they come and they do the roof and they put the solar on, and they're done 2 months before the guy's finished inside, mm-hmm. then that solar contractor sits on his 10% holdback for a couple months.
Right.
And any change orders as well.
Right.
So it makes it very, very difficult to, first of all, to explain it to the contractor why it's that way.
Right.
So they have to really understand what the process is, the fact that it's a federally guaranteed product, and these are the rules.
Right. Right. So, yeah, I mean, you don't want these delayed draws and stuff, because then you also risk mechanics liens and people getting really upset,
right,
and everything like that. Or you might have a job that has to start and then stop,
right,
for the other guy to come in and take over. I mean, it just becomes a real laborious process. And the thing I think what people may not realize but could learn to appreciate is that you're there from the very beginning of the process, before, say, the loan closes, right from the beginning, when it just after the application, say, and then all the way there until the completion of the project, which could be, 6-7 months later.
Correct.
At least. So, so you're kind of, that service, you're having to deal with the draw specialists. You're getting called out for inspections, for draws and stuff like that. And sometimes being an advocate for the homeowner, there may be some maybe change orders that were unauthorized, things like that, right?
Right. I try and stay on top of that as much as I can. Sometimes things happen and I don't discover them until I'm called to do a draw.
Right.
Good example, I had a house in Santa Rosa that we had nominal repairs to the wallboard patch, best match possible to existing texture, and prepare for paint.
Right.
I went to the home for the first draw and the entire house had no wallboard in it. They'd stripped everything to the studs without telling anyone.
Right.
And there'd been a miscommunication between the contractor and his demolition crew about the extent of their work. And they'd gone in there and stripped the house. And the contractor's sitting there, oh, whoa.
Yeah.
Well, he's going to be responsible for restoration.
Yeah.
And since there's no money to do that, he's at a loss. And oftentimes those things drag out forever. But mistakes happen.
Yeah.
And we just have to deal with the lender and work through it.
I think we've seen a lot of different stories. And one of the things that is kind of unique about an FHA 203K especially is that short of actually scraping the house, you could do a complete new rebuild as long as you save the foundation.
Correct.
And I remember on a deal that I was working with, this is my story, I was working with a guy, he was a Russian guy, and he wanted to do a complete rebuild on this house. And I told him, I don't remember his name, for lack of a better, Vladimir, or whatever his name might be. I said, okay, you could do that, but when you demo the house, you have to save the foundation. You can't, So a few weeks later, I went over just to see how the project was going. I wanted to see it. And I noticed that there was no foundation. It was scraped. I go, what happened to the foundation? Well, you told me to save the foundation. I go, yeah, where is it? And he pointed to a pile of cement rubble. No bueno, that didn't work. That then became a brand new construction. So what are some of your do you have any kind of stories? I know that one in Santa Rosa you just talked about. Anything else that might?
The biggest event that I've had occur was there's been over time a couple of different interpretations of what saving that foundation meant.
Right.
Early on, and when I first started, the interpretation was that you had to save 1 square foot.
Right, a piece of it. Right.
And you could rotate the property all the way around that 1 square foot.
Right.
Then the interpretation became that you could not remove any foundation, that you had to keep it all, that you could fortify and repair, but you could not replace.
Right.
So we had a triplex actually in Oakland, and it was very old and very poorly kept.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, 2 of the toilets from the main floor unit were flushing into the basement.
Ooh.
And it was a mess.
Yeah.
I mean, green things growing 2 feet long. It was pretty bizarre.
Right.
But we finally had to, it was a brick foundation, which of course, after a couple of earthquakes, are loose anyway. Yeah, so we literally had to build another foundation inside the brick foundation, set the house back on there, and then go fix the bricks so they didn't fall off. But literally built a foundation that it would have been built where the old one was.
Right.
But instead it was built inside it, and merely for cosmetics and to meet the guidelines.
Wow.
And then use words like fortify and support and repair rather than replace.
Wow. Well, this has been a great time. I mean, I've learned a lot. I hope the people watching this video would learn a lot. But thank you, Dan, for sitting down with me and kind of going over the ins and outs of what a HUD consultant is. And I hope, you viewers have really picked up a lot of information off of this. So thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Welcome back. Hey, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, the notification bell to let you know when a new episode is up. Hit the share button to share this to all your friends. And you can leave a comment for any subjects that you might want me to cover, or any questions you might have about this episode or any other episode. So what'd you think about the HUD Consultant? I've worked with HUD Consultants in the past, particularly even with this HUD Consultant. And, you know, they are the advocate for you, the homeowner and the consumer. They look out for, to make sure that the contractor is doing what he said that he did, that he's not overcharging for the items that are listed on there, and he stays within budget. I've seen sometimes where a general contractor may do a change order on something to fix a mistake that they did. And HUD Consultant came to the rescue and said, no, you can't do that, you shouldn't do that. And he ended up taking care of it without charging the homeowner. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this episode of the Renovation Nation. I'm Howard, your renovation guru. Until the next time.